Hey guys, James here. After posting my M5 MacBook Pro video, I saw some comments from some Luna users saying that Luna uses efficiency cores on their Apple Silicon Mac, while others reported otherwise with results just like the ones in my M5 MacBook Pro video. Even though my testing process is pretty rigorous and the test data are always triple verified over the span of 2 weeks, there's always a possibility for errors and oversights, as I do not have a science background. And the last thing I want is putting out misinformation. This is why I always encourage you guys to do your own testing and watch other videos to get a wide range of perspectives. My videos are certainly not the best ones out there, and I'm certainly not infallible. No one is, right? So I went back and did some extra testing in Luna, Logic Pro, and Reaper, and lo and behold, I discovered something new. But the good thing is that the test result in my M5 MacBook Pro video were actually mostly correct, and all the charts and conclusions were still sound. So if you watched that video, everything's good. You were not misinformed. Phew! What I discovered was that if I use Luna's tutorial project, which just has a vocal track, a drum track, a bass track, and a synth track, and each of those tracks has a stock tape emulation and nothing else. And if I duplicate the tracks to the point where Luna can no longer play the project back smoothly, you can actually see the efficiency cores being used quite a bit, presumably to process audio because the efficiency core activity rises and falls with the playing and stopping of the playback. At that point, I was like, okay, something's going on here because there's no way I made such a huge mistake in my testing because, like I said, the test results were verified multiple times on multiple Apple Silicon chips and in a span of 2 weeks. And this is why you see me testing on a 10-core M2 Pro chip here. Now, the biggest difference between the tutorial test and my regular tests is that the tutorial project only has stock Luna plugins, and I only use third-party plugins in my tests because stock plugins are only available in the DAW they are part of, so I wouldn't be able to set up the same test project across multiple DAWs. And so I thought, okay, let's add a third-party, well-optimized plugin from a major plugin company into the mix, pun unintended, and see how that changes things. After all, the free version of Luna doesn't seem to come with any other plugins aside from the emulation stuff, and most people use their DAWs with third-party plugins anyways. And that's why I always test Macs with third-party plugins. So this is the Luna tutorial project. As you can see, on the master bus is API summing. I think it was Neve, and then, yeah, it didn't work, so I changed it to something, so there's something on the summing. And the rest is just tape. This is a default tutorial. If you open the tutorial in Luna, you'll see this. There's nothing else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just Saturn. I'll just add a band here, increase the drive, increase the oversampling to superb, so we don't have to create so many instances to hit the ceiling, right? And then I will just copy it over. All right, so now each track, drum, bass, synth, vocal, they all have the same one instance of Saturn 2. Okay, that's too much for Luna to handle. So I'm just gonna start deleting. Did you notice how the efficiency core usage drastically changed now that there's a third-party plugin? Let me put that side by side with the tutorial project test that had just the stock emulation plugins and 0 third-party plugins. You can see that just by adding a third-party plugin to the tracks, the efficiency core usage drastically decreased, despite everything else being the same. Luna does seem to be using a small percentage of the efficiency cores for something, but my guess is that it's not audio processing, but for some other background processes. If you're a developer and have some insights, please feel free to share in the comments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove all the built-in stock emulation and just use Saturn and see how that's going to change things. I'm going to delete everything. I'm going to leave the Saturn too, but I'm going to remove this. Just remove everything that's built in, just so we can isolate just the third-party plugin here and see what that does. One more thing, summing, I don't want any, none. Okay, so everything is clear except for one instance of Saturn 2 on each track. So I'm going to do the same test and see how that's going to affect the CPU history. Okay, that's not going to play, so let's start deleting. So the evidence shows us that with only a single third-party plugin on each track and no stock plugins, the CPU core usage looked the same as when there was a mix of stock plugin and third-party plugin on each track. Performance cores were fully used and efficiency cores were barely used. Now, just to be thorough, I created a brand new Luna project, dragged in a stereo audio file, put FabFilter Saturn 2 on it, set it to screaming amp, and set oversampling to superb. And then I also put Ozone 11 maximizer on it, set it to IRC4 mode, turn on true peak production, soft clip, and transient emphasis. So two very well-known plugins from two very high-end audio companies. The results were exactly the same: full performance core usage and minimal efficiency core usage. As a reference, I set up the exact same project in Reaper, and as expected, both the performance cores and efficiency cores were fully used, and as a result, I could duplicate more tracks in Reaper. This is shown in many of my videos already, all the way back to my M2 Pro review video in 2022. But let me present you yet another solid piece of evidence that Luna wasn't using the efficiency cores to process audio in the test with third-party plugins. When I turned off Anticipative FX processing in Reaper, which prevents Reaper from using efficiency cores, the number of tracks that Reaper and Luna could handle was exactly identical. Not one track more, not one track less, exactly 36 tracks on both DAWs. Here's a graphic that helps you visualize that. So both Reaper without efficiency core usage and Luna could handle 36 tracks on the same 10-core M2 Pro. And once I enabled efficiency cores for Reaper, it can handle 54 tracks, which happens to be an exactly 50% performance increase. For reference, Reaper's Anticipative FX processing is on by default, and is very stable even at small buffer sizes in my experience. I've tracked with Reaper at 32 buffer and never had any problems. Honestly, I didn't even know what that setting did until like 2 years ago, and I've been using Reaper for like 10 years. If you are a Reaper user, I would love to hear about your experiences. Has Anticipative FX processing ever given you any issues at all? I did some extra testing with Logic Pro as well, with similar methods, because, well, this is clearly my rabbit hole. I opened one of the demo projects that comes with Logic Pro, which is Swing by Ellie Dixon. This project only has stock plugins and sound, so there's no third-party plugins. And then I put all the tracks into a summing track and started duplicating that summing track. So just like my test with Luna's tutorial project, I'm basically trying to see how many copies of this project Logic can handle. Logic gave me the system overload pop-up at 9 total copies of the project. It could play back 8 copies no problem, but you can see that one of the performance cores wasn't used much, and neither were the efficiency cores. There's clearly still juice in the CPU, but Logic, even with only stock plugins, is just not tapping into that juice. I don't know why, but that's the empirical evidence. Another test I did with Logic is using the stock guitar amp sim on a stereo guitar DI, and then adding a third-party plugin, Ozone Maximizer, after the amp sim on the same track. And then I duplicated it as many times as I could before I got the system overload pop-up. Now, one of you might say, Why are you putting a maximizer on a track? It's supposed to be used as the last plugin in mastering. Well, first of all, in digital audio engineering, I can do whatever I want. You can do whatever you want. I've definitely used a maximizer to square off some dynamics of the bass in the mix for metal music. It's fine, it works great. But in this context, I used it simply because it's super CPU intensive at IRC4 mode, and I wouldn't have to duplicate so many tracks just to hit the ceiling. Anyways, you can see that as I duplicate the tracks, it's always the performance cores that were being used. At the point right before I got the system overload pop-up, performance cores were used to the max, while efficiency cores were just hanging out. Now, one advice I want to give you is that if you're doing your own testing, and I encourage you to, make sure to push your DAW to the limit when checking the CPU history monitor. This is because I've noticed that sometimes, for certain DAWs, if the project is light enough on the CPU, the DAW might actually only use efficiency cores to process. I've seen that happen in Luna. This is the tutorial project with no third-party plugins. So here I had just duplicated the project 13 times, so it's still very light on the CPU. And you can see that it seemed like only the efficiency cores were being used to process audio. But then, as I duplicate more tracks and the CPU needed to do more work, performance cores took over and efficiency core utilization dropped at the same time. I believe this can happen in Logic as well, because last year, a viewer reached out to me saying that he saw that Logic used efficiency cores. I asked him to send me a video, and it turned out he was barely pushing Logic. And once I got him to push Logic to the limit, he confirmed that only performance cores were working hard, while efficiency cores were pretty much idle. So hopefully this video offered some useful information to you. All the takeaways and recommendations in my M5 MacBook Pro video are still solid, so be sure to watch that if you haven't. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you want. Happy mixing, and I'll see you next time.